a LiSTNR production.
The ripple effect of crime stretches further than we often imagine, touching lives in ways that are raw, profound, and deeply personal. On Crime Insiders, we're privileged to hear the untold stories from those who face crime's impact head on. Today, we'll delve into some of these extraordinary stories. This is Crime Insiders, what we've learnt about the human impact of working in crime. When you think of a mathematician, especially a statistician, you might picture someone detached, logical, working in quiet isolation. But for Professor David Balding, the reality is far more gripping. As the mind behind a groundbreaking model for evaluating DNA evidence, David's been involved in some of the world's most infamous cases. Amanda Knox, the identification of King Richard III's remains, and more. But there's one unforgettable moment he shared with Crime Insiders Forensics host, Kathryn Fox.
Oh, well, it was a great sense of achievement for me. I'd put sort of years of work into developing these methods and to, resolve this long-standing case and at least bring some closure to the relatives, some of whom were still alive and participating. That was a great sense of satisfaction. This is one of the most complex cases I ever dealt with, as well as being a high-profile case. So it really gave a good sense of that all that effort had been worthwhile. I have also had, I've had that feeling in many cases, although often I give my evidence and leave. In some cases I don't really I'm not even there for the verdict. But I do remember very clearly another case I was involved with of an elderly woman who lived alone and was brutally murdered in her kitchen with her own rolling pin. And just sort of quietly over the lunch break, a woman came up to me and introduced herself as the daughter of the woman and of the murdered woman. And she thanked me for the work that I was doing. And that was really a moving experience. That it was just such a wonderful experience to have that personal connection.
Because you think of mathematicians as being in an office or in a laboratory or somewhere scientific and removed from everybody, but you're actually dealing with real people's problems and real cases.
Yeah, very much so. And of course, during this process, I've met many defendants and many forensic scientists and lawyers and police. I have to say that was mostly in the UK. I've also done a few cases in Australia. It's like everything. Most people in most jobs are good people trying to do a good job. So I found it a very positive experience. For all the faults in the system and lots of waste of money in various ways. But basically we do have a good system that works well. And I was involved in many cases where I think it seems to me the right person was convicted of the crime and sent to jail appropriately.
Jason Semple has been stabbed on the job, deployed to war zones in Timor and Afghanistan with the AFP, and even witnessed the murder of a close colleague and friend. To say he's seen it all almost feels like an understatement. But that's not what you're about to hear. For Jason, like so many first responders, the deepest wounds aren't the ones inflicted on the job. It's the anguish of witnessing the raw devastation and unrelenting grief of victims and their families.
I was working on a Saturday with one of my partners, female partner, and there was a job came on F3 freeway down near Hawkesbury of a motor vehicle accident. So yeah, we copied that and made our way there from Gosport.
Pretty rough weather.
A really localised storm cell went through really quickly. So by the time we got there, it was sun's out. Everything's, quite wet. And there was a lot of water on the side of the freeway. And what had happened is a female driver, 29 years of age, coming down the freeway and just aquaplaned her vehicle and it shot through the guardrail, which is unusual. And it's quite a steep, heavily pretty dense, decent-sized trees. So the car's bounced its way down. So it's going to be quite a serious accident. I parked up near where obviously her vehicle's pushed through the barrier, and left my partner up there with the radio and everything, and just said, listen, when everything starts turning up, you're up here. So I climbed down because it was really arduous getting through all the bush, and I get to the car, and the paramedics are sort of trying to work. There's one paramedic there, and he's trying to work out how to get her out of the car. And so he goes, mate, just come here, hold her hand. And he went around the other side, and he was just working on and ensuring that the vehicle, because it was jammed between two trees, that it wasn't just going to actually let go, and then him and I would get injured as well. Anyway, so I'm holding her hand, and she's sort of just like, taking really shallow, fast breathing, obviously very seriously injured internally, really pretty, just like everything about her looked untouched, so I'm holding her hand and just trying to comfort her. And it's like, it's a lot, there's a gravity in that, and there's a lot of responsibility in that, where you're holding someone's hand. And basically she took her last breath, and so as soon as she passed away, I've sort of deferred to the paramedic. Hey, do we need to be doing, compressions, and what did he want me to do? And he goes, no, like, mate, she's gone. And because he'd already made some assessments, and obviously, he was quite sure of how bad, she was, and I don't go into their world. So he came over, and he did another assessment, and he goes, no, mate, she's like, there's absolutely nothing we can do. Plus she was sort of jammed in, so it's not as if we could pull her out and do CPR easily. Anyway, so yeah, she passed away. And, so your Saturday morning, where I was like half an hour earlier, I was just looking forward to going down to a local cafe to get a coffee and fly the New South Wales police flag around. And then you're here, and then you're just like, wow. And anyway, I said to him, I'm going to get back up to the freeway, and we're just, I'm going to have to make a few calls, crash investigation, and then we've got to obviously be able to recover everything as well, and her. And I started walking up. I got about halfway up between where this car was and the road. And you can imagine I'm literally grabbing hold of things to climb. And I hear a phone ring in the middle of the bush. And I knew straight away it's obviously a phone, that's popped out of her car when it's been banging. Anyway, it rang long enough for me to actually find it. And I picked it up. And then obviously I'm not going to answer it, because then I've got to, someone's going to say, well, why is this dude, answering her phone? So I let it ring out. But then the message bank pops up on it straight away, and it wasn't locked. I just pressed play and then made the fatal error of putting it up and listening to it. And then I hear this message come into the phone from her 8-year-old son, she'd been away for a weekend with some girlfriends, and then obviously she was on her way home. So he's rang her. And basically the message was, hey, Mummy, I cannot wait to see you. I've missed you so much. And then we're going to the movies tonight. Yeah, and then basically every little trigger you could imagine, like that would really cut you to the bone, this 8-year-old kid said it in this message. And I'm standing there in the middle of the bush, and then the message ends, and I'm just standing there going, and it literally just floored me. Like it literally just sucked every bit of like air out of my lungs. And even now, like I can still actually take myself back to that emotion. So I'm standing there just going, why did I listen to that message? And then I walk up to the roadway, and my partner comes over, and she goes, are you okay? Because I was just like, just in my own little world for a second. And then I just handed her the phone and pressed the message. Unfortunately, I had to share the pain, I suppose. Anyway, next thing you know, she's in tears. She's in the car, and because I'd explained that his mum has just passed away. I was holding her hand. So yeah, I've been involved and seen so many things over the years, and so much tragedy and just like shocking stuff. But it's funny, the ones that really get under your skin. That one got under my skin, because it was like just, I was walking up and I was processing the fact and the gravity of just holding someone's hand with their last breaths. And, I was just been, talking to her softly and saying, you're going to be okay. The same things that people had said to me, 10 years earlier or 11 years earlier, while I'm laying on the street. And just to have the gravity of it reinforced by that woman's child. And because I'm policing, I'm doing uniform policing, and I've got kids of my own. The reality of that area in police work just like hit me like a brick to the side of the head. So just really just come from left field, and it doesn't allow you to set up some of those bits of armor that you normally get to start placing in front of you mentally.
Yes.
It's just like straight through to the keeper, and touches your soul.
There's a real rawness about it, isn't there? And it's, Jason, I just the honesty in which you're speaking about this, because like you said, coppers can sit around and you can tell all these war stories and all these things that people who haven't been in the job, people who haven't experienced it, they're almost disbelieving. And then it's something like that. And in its tragedy, it's just such a simple thing. It's you're holding a woman's hand at the time of her death, but then the tipping point when the little bloke leaves the message on mum's phone, and it's all, like you say, it's all that stuff. And maybe for you too, Jason, there's that unmistakable connection back to when you yourself are on the other side almost of that situation.
Yeah.
It's all comes in together, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If there's any silver lining to it, it's just the exposure to that level of tragedy and grief. You wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but the one thing that I do draw from it is just how precious and fleeting life can be. Like I said, there's a couple of pathways you can go after. You can sort of suck on your thumb and sit in the corner. Not the best analogy, but
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Or you can learn from it as best you can, and try to pull some positive from it. And I suppose for me, it's just like maintaining my empathy whilst you're wearing a uniform, being grateful all the time because you're breathing. And just having positive pathways to how you try to process it.
Being in the police isn't just a job. It's a role that ties you deeply to your community. And in a small town where everyone knows everyone, the lines between the personal and professional often blur. Peter Baines, a former crime scene investigator with New South Wales Police in the Northern Tablelands, knows this all too well. On Crime Insider's Forensics, he shared some of the cases that shaped his career and his life.
Certainly the first job I remember, not necessarily the first one I attended, was a stabbing homicide. We were working 3 shifts at the time, and it was the afternoon was a Friday, and there'd been whatever led to it. He had fatally stabbed his wife on the steps of a building near Chinatown, and his wife, as was discovered during the post-mortem, was pregnant. And do you know what? I can't drive past that location and not for a few seconds think about that job and think about her.
I think that's something we sort of tend to forget as well, that there are triggers, because if you've been to a scene like that and had to work at that scene, you still have to go past that because that's your local area.
Yeah, absolutely. Like only yesterday I returned from speaking at a conference in Tamworth, and Tamworth was where I'd spent 10 years of my forensic career, and there is so many places up there and towns and that have memories of the jobs and the times and what we did and the significance of some of those. And at the time of investigating and responding to some of those major crimes, there's a very clear focus on your job, which is to attend, examine, record, interpret, and present the evidence. Yeah, and I think it's Kathy, as you get older and you're well removed from that, I probably think more of the significance of those jobs and the impact it had on families. And there was a particular job I did in Tamworth, which, really brought that home to me, because it was the victim of a fatal farming accident was very close to our family. And, for me, it helped me realise that not everyone is dealing with death on a weekly basis as we were. And you lose the perspective, and sometimes you forget the significance and the enormity of what we're involved in.
And I think the other things people underestimate is first responders and doctors, police, know people in those rural areas in which they're living and working.
That was exact circumstances. I arrived at a fatal farming accident, and the ambos had covered the body with a sheet. And, of course, that was irrelevant to what had happened. So I removed the sheet, and laying on the ground was the husband of my wife's best friend. My kids and his kids all played together, and to see Laurie laying on the ground was, I reeled back and ended up taking custody with the coroner's permission of the entire investigation. So I did the interviews with the family and so forth, so that they didn't have to deal with people they didn't know. But it was a job that helped me remember the families behind the jobs, because, as I say, I did so many of them that you in some sad way, you would forget the significance of that. And that job with Laurie helped me remember that broader and lasting impact.
The emotional toll and responsibility placed on you must be so much greater when you are close to people and their families.
Yeah, I think you would know, having spoken to many people from within this area and having been a medical practitioner yourself, you see the impact of exposure and PTSD, and part of the role that I was doing towards the end of my career was dealing with those internally who left the organisation with PTSD, and it was always a question without an answer as to why those of us who went through what we might say is relatively unscathed, why we came out okay and why others did not. I don't know that there's a clear answer, and I feel fortunate that I had the career that I did and had the diversity of the work that I did, and feel in the main that I came out the other side okay. And I think one of the things for me was that I was fortunate through a number of reasons that my role within the forensic services continued to change as I moved through the organisation. So never did I look forward and go, oh, well, I'm on call for another 10 or 15 years. Realistically, as I said, I just returned from Tamworth. I left there in 2002. It's feasible I could still be up there working as a crime scene investigator 20 years after I left, still been on call. I grew tired of the travel and the jobs and so forth when I was there, and I was fortunate to move back to Sydney into a new role, which then removed me and changed the perspective and changed the role and changed the nature of the work.
Well, I think one of the things is doctors have this as well, and particularly specialists who are on call all the time for their private patients, never going to sleep, knowing you're going to get a full night's sleep of peace. And you know that if you are called, it's something catastrophic.
What I grew tired of was not the catastrophic jobs. In some strange way, I really enjoyed the contribution and the challenge of the big jobs. It was getting called to jobs in some of those country areas where you were despised as much by the victim as you were by the offenders. And you'd walk into a house and there was fingerprint dust on the house from the last time it was a crime scene. It was those jobs where I went, I'm adding absolutely zero value, but I have to be here. I know how this will play out before the courts. And it was those jobs. It wasn't the big jobs. It was those ones. But you're absolutely right. That disturbance to your sleep is not healthy.
One of the most harrowing aspects of being a detective is investigating crimes involving children. On Crime Insider's Detectives, this theme recurs again and again, made even more agonising when a child victim reminds you of your own, sharing their age, their appearance, or even their name. For former New South Wales Police Inspector and Prosecutor Carla Tomadini, this became a chilling reality. She shared her experience with Crime Insider's Detectives host, Brent Sanders. Take a listen.
At that time, I was working in homicide. So what the on-call car involved was you had to be ready to go any time of the day. The inspector would ring you and say, we've got a job at this place. It was Father's Day. It was in the morning, and I had 2 young kids myself. So, my husband was getting his little Father's Day, and then I got a phone call from the inspector, said we've had this murder of 3 children at Cabramatta. So then I got in the car and headed out there. I met one of my workmates there. What happens is once we arrive, as we're the specialists, so to speak, there's already detectives on site. So they're the local detectives. So they had commenced the investigation, and then we come in and we are briefed by them, and then we set about a game plan of how we were going to look into this matter. Now, what happened with that matter was Craig had walked into Parramatta Police Station and given himself up. His mother had found the children in the house and had notified the police, but he'd also given himself up the same day. So we had the crime scene and we had the investigation, and we also had then the ongoing liaison and dealing with 3 different families.
Yes, of course, because each of the little ones had different mothers.
Yes.
Goodness.
And they had extended family who were all invested in that child's life, which you can understand.
Yes.
But it was very difficult to manage, to keep everybody aware, progress, what we were doing, etc. And then we had his mother as well, who was a witness. She was in the house at the time that this happened, which was late at night. So he was charged and remained in custody the entire time. So this was at sentence. As part of his sentence matter, he was forensic psychiatrist, reports, things like that. And he never gave them anything. He just said, I don't remember, I don't know. He never provided any answer for anybody whatsoever.
You mentioned, you yourself at the time were celebrating Father's Day with your husband and 2 little ones. How hard is that to reconcile, leaving your family on Father's Day to visit another family where these little ones, and you're not a robot, you can't help but as a mum, that's got to be tough.
It was tough. It was tough. And I remember especially this matter, I seem to have had a bit of bad luck around this time. I had a number of very young children being murdered, but this one obviously with the 3. I remember going home. So usually when you're called out, it's like a long shift, 24 hours sometimes. We just work non-stop because they're the key hours to gather evidence, etc. And I remember going home. It was very late at night. My children were sleeping together. They were a little bit younger than the eldest, I think.
A little bit younger than Jackson, who was 6.
And my son is also Jack.
Oh, wow.
And he had blonde hair, as Jackson did. And I remember just going into his room and laying my hand on him and just watching him sleep, and going, wow, how lucky am I? And Jackson's parents especially, they were beautiful. So his mother had married again, and a lovely, lovely man. Jackson was their only child at that time. And, sometimes it's difficult to reconcile.
Oh, yeah.
But then I sometimes I'd go, right, someone needs to speak for these children in what I'm doing, in investigation of what I can do and what I can control. And that's where I sort of looked at it. And I do actually now I remember during the first week or so of that matter, it was September 11.
Wow.
And then I remember going to work the next day to this matter, like going, wow,
Yes.
look what's happened in the world.
Was your husband in the job?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he was.
So there was I guess in that regard, you're talking to somebody who speaks the same language as you and understands coming back from something like this that, you know, there needs to be arm wrapped around a bit of debriefing and a bit of chat.
Absolutely. And he, not only someone who understands or you can talk to about it, but someone you don't need to talk to about it as well. I know other people who are married to people who weren't cops, and that gets difficult because they've got to explain.
You obviously got the conviction.
He pleaded guilty.
He pleaded guilty. Right.
And then he got those life sentences because the judge was just horrified by the whole matter. But he appealed those life sentences and that was overturned, and his sentence was reduced to I think 35 years, or it was still a long time, but it wasn't life.
And he appealed that on the grounds of what?
With life imprisonment in New South Wales, it's restricted, obviously, because life means life. So there's strong, legislation in relation to that. And so he argued that he didn't fit into that, and the fact that he pleaded guilty. That's always got to be taken into account because we want to continue to encourage people to plead guilty. So if they get a life sentence regardless of pleading guilty, then there's no incentive. No. The sentences were still lengthy, so I was comfortable with that and I could see the reasoning about that, but it's only now I can talk in such a matter-of-fact way. That's the way the system works and probably should as well. When they handed down the decision, the life sentence, Jackson's mother was right next to me. And we looked at each other. It was the first time ever that tears started coming out. And the Crown prosecutor looked at me like, what are you doing? And this is the tricky thing with matters like this. You're physically touching these people because it's that deep. I think it's a bond that, if I never see these people again, it'll always be there. You're not going to fix it. You're not going to change it, but you can make it a bit better.